So it is my great pleasure to welcome a very special guest today for this episode of In-Depth Conversations. It's Johan Östling. He's an associate professor of history and the director of LUC, which stands for Lund's Center for the History of Knowledge. One of his most recent awards that he received is the Einar Hansen Research Award of 2021 for his efforts to bring humanities into the public conversation. So I'm very, very excited to have you here for this conversation today, Johan. Welcome to the channel.
Thank you so much.
Your research has centered around the history of knowledge, and particularly modern European history, and post-war Sweden, Scandinavia, and Germany. Could you perhaps tell us a little bit about what your research has been about in this area and what led you to this field?
Yeah, I started off in history, or that is my discipline. I defended my thesis in 2008, and that was actually about the experiences of National Socialism and how that affected Sweden in the wake of the Second World War. And one effect was that Sweden went from being a very German-centered country towards the Anglo-Saxon tradition in intellectual life and cultural life, etc. And during that period I was also a visiting fellow in Berlin and was then caught by the contemporary discussions about the idea of the university in Germany, and that became actually my postdoctoral project, which was about the Humboldtian tradition, the German academic tradition, and the debate about what is a university and what should it be. And I spent another period in Berlin in 2013-14, and then I was also very much inspired by ongoing discussions in Germany about what they called Wissensgeschichte, which is history of knowledge, and not history of science, which is called Wissenschaftsgeschichte. But Wissensgeschichte, history of knowledge, is something broader, more about the circulation of knowledge in society and other forms of knowledge than just what we are dealing with at the universities, for example. So after that I tried to introduce this field in the Nordic countries and cultivated contacts with various scholars, and in 2020 we established this center, Lund Center for the History of Knowledge.
Oh, so a very recent project, okay. And
yes.
You've had a long journey there, been to Germany as well.
Yeah, that's right.
Fascinating. Okay, so that makes sense then that your journey took you that way. Speaking of the Humboldt tradition, you have this fantastic book here that you've written, which is about Humboldt and the modern German university. An Intellectual History is the title of the book, and as the title gives away, it's about the Humboldt tradition. Could you maybe elaborate for those of us who are not familiar with the concept? Just give us a little bit about what that's about and the values that they have.
First of all, I can just mention that this book is also available open access. So if you have an interest in this topic, you can find it online.
That's right.
But it was published in 2018. Humboldt, the Humboldtian tradition, that is another name for the modern German research university, which actually started or was established gradually beginning in the early 19th century and then developing throughout the century. And it's important to remember then that the university, of course, has a much longer history, going back to the Middle Ages. But at that time, or for many, many centuries, the university was mainly an institution dealing with reproducing, disseminating old truths, not creating new knowledge. So research, in our understanding of the world, was not part of the university's core mission. But that came with the Humboldtian tradition around 1800. So then the idea of the university was reformulated. So not only teaching, disseminating knowledge, but also producing new knowledge. That is, research became the core mission of the university.
Is that in the 19th century?
In the early 19th century, formulated by Wilhelm von Humboldt, but also other of his philosophers' colleagues at that time. They reformulated the idea of the university because at that time the university was in a crisis. Should we dismantling, abolish this institution, or should we reinvigorate it? And Humboldt, he preferred the last option here.
Okay.
But he also stressed not only that research should be a core mission, but also that what the German called Bildung, that is self-cultivation of the human mind, should be a core mission of the university. So we should not just be training future physicians or lawyers or priests, but also help the students to develop their internal capacities by studying philosophy, history, mathematics, etc. So that also became an important part of the Humboldtian tradition in the 19th century and later also in the 20th century in other parts of the world.
Okay, so it sounds like kind of that's where the idea of like an academic as a lifestyle, not just producing research, but being an academic, is that kind of...
Yeah, it came partly from that as well. Yeah.
Okay.
And also you can add another concept that is also very important in the Humboldtian understanding of the university, and that is academic freedom. Of course, that has existed before, but he and his colleagues emphasized this even more in various philosophical interventions. And this is, of course, a very tricky concept. It can mean many different things, but I think it's fair to say that he both stressed what you can call the individual freedom and the institutional freedom. Individual freedom in that sense that students and teachers should have the right to formulate their own questions, seek their own answers, etc. But also the institutional freedom in terms of that the university as an institution has to have some kind of distance to power, to the church or to the state or to businesses, for example. It should be an autonomous institution in that sense. Okay,
interesting. We'll get back more into that in a minute. But continuing on that, so you've mentioned a few different values that the Humboldtian tradition proposed. And what would you say we in Scandinavia, in Sweden particularly, for our higher education systems, because obviously academic freedom is a very strong part, and I think most of us take it for granted. We don't even know how else it would be. But would you say what are some of the most influential values that we have?
I think it's fair to say that the whole Humboldtian concept or the whole Humboldtian understanding really has been imported into Scandinavia, into Sweden, and that came in the last part of the last decades of the 19th century, when the universities in Sweden and the rest of Scandinavia and many other parts of Europe as well were transformed along these German lines. They were turned into research universities. Not only this teaching mission, but also research became a core principle, but also, of course, academic freedom as a principle, and later perhaps also more as a practice. But that is not a simple history. It has been many obstacles. Of course, the church and also the state have had much power to define what kind of education the university should pursue. But as a principle, it is really imported from Germany.
So we kind of took the whole idea. And so why then? I think it's a fitting question then to ask, why do you think that idea in particular? Because it wasn't the only model available. I mean, the French Grande École, who are more authoritarian, or they imposed restrictions on the curriculum. They wanted to have a more mainstreamed view for everyone, and like they even imposed a ban on beards in 1852. So why do you think that this Humboldtian tradition had a greater appeal for us in Scandinavia?
Well, first of all, the German universities became the leading universities in the 19th century from all parts of the world, not least from North America. Many students and professors came to Germany, to Leipzig and Berlin and Heidelberg, to study there and to learn from the greatest scientists and the greatest scholars of the time. And then also, if we're talking about political, military and economic power, Germany and the German Empire after 1871 became the leading European power. And of course, that also influenced the surrounding area, including Scandinavia, just like the American universities influenced the rest of the world after 1945. So it has to do with that kind of geopolitics and power as well. And Sweden, especially since the 1860s, was very much of a German-influenced country. German was the first foreign language between the 1850s and then the end of the Second World War. And we were very much influenced by German culture, German politics, German philosophy, and also academic matters.
That's really interesting. Like you say, it came with the power that Germany had. It sounds like a bit, and it's also, I think, what your book goes into as well, that the Humboldtian idea is not necessarily a timeless idea.
No.
It's dependent on society and the time that we're living in. But something that probably you find interesting as well, and I find very interesting, what happened only very recently this spring, that this value or principle of academic freedom became protected under Swedish law. Could you maybe help us elaborate or help us to understand what this means for how academic work is done in Sweden, and what this means for the future of academia and its role in society? Can we maybe learn something from history in this case? Well,
it's hard to say. Perhaps it's too early to say. That is, of course, an answer that historians often tend to use when they should comment on contemporary issues. But I think in this case, leading politicians in Sweden, of course, they stress that this is a way of emphasizing the importance of academic freedom in a time, in a period when academic freedom is threatened in other parts of the world. And that is perhaps partly true, I'm not sure. What is true, undoubtedly, is that it is a growing interest in discussing academic freedom, not only in Sweden, but in other parts of the world as well. And I find that interesting, and it's important to, I think, bear in mind when we are discussing these issues, that academic freedom can mean different things in different contexts as well. And I think the debate could benefit, or it could be an advantage for the debate if we had more of a kind of conceptual clarity, but also kind of contextual and historical sensitivity. What are the understandings that are at stake here? What are the definitions? And I'm not sure that politicians or academics, for that matter, have that kind of sensitivity at the moment.
Interesting, So definitely we need more discussions around it.
Yes, definitely.
What it really means, academic freedom. Okay, and so maybe I'll just ask you a final question about your work in or in matters that concern the exchange of academics and the wider community. You have recently, or like I mentioned in the introduction as well, you just were awarded this prestigious award for your work in that, and you organized an event here at Lund University. Would you please just tell us a little bit about your work with how academics can communicate or be part of the wider community?
Yes, I think it's very important that scholars in the humanities and social sciences are part of the wider community. And one challenge, of course, is that the old public square doesn't really exist anymore. The national broadcasting companies, they are still there, but they are not as strong as they used to be. The printed press, the printed books, well, they are not the only platforms anymore. On the other hand, scholars really have the opportunity to take advantage of new forms, new media outlets. For example, YouTube channels, podcasts, Wikipedia, contributing to the conversation, for example. So that is other ways that the scholars could really communicate their knowledge in many ways.
Yeah.
On the other hand, we also have this internal tendency within academia, increasing specialization, that we are not communicating within large fields of scholarship, for example, history or philosophy, and even less perhaps over the borders between fields. So that is definitely a challenge.
Mm. And do you see, so how do you aim to to help, especially internally? I think maybe it would be interesting to know.
Well, I think that different kind of interdisciplinary enterprises are important, but also forums or platforms that bring together scholars from the different fields. That is important.
It's indeed an important work.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Johan. It's been a pleasure to have you on this channel, and really interesting to hearing all your thoughts and discussing this with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.